Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, meet Toronto-based Michael Bungay Stanier, best known for The Coaching Habit, the best-selling coaching book of the century, today talking with me about his most recent book, How to Work with Almost Anyone. It's a fantastic conversation. Michael is a thoughtful and engaging guest, and we talk about the hard truth. Most of us leave the health and fate of our at-work relationships to chance. We say hi, exchange pleasantries, hope for the best, and immediately get into the work. Through our conversation and his book, Michael shows and tells us how to build the best possible relationships with the key people at work. Let's listen in now. Michael, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I am doing pretty well, and I'm very happy to be here, so thanks for having me along.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you on the mic. Where am I finding you today?
Well, I'm in chilly Toronto as we speak, but in 48 hours' time, I'll be in Australia, which is where I'm originally from. So you've caught me just in the moment before I hop on a plane.
Well, fantastic. So once again, you're a busy guy. Thanks for making time. And I'm in Toronto as well. Now, I see you have a connection in some way, shape, or form to Toronto. Talk about, Australia versus Toronto, where you live, where you work. Just a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So, I grew up in Australia and was pretty happy there. But in my mid-20s, won a scholarship that took me to England, where, amongst other things, and probably as my number one achievement, I fell in love with a Canadian. I didn't go back to Australia, and we lived in Oxford for a while, London for a while, Boston for a while, but then in 2001, in 2000, we went to a local pub in Boston because we weren't loving it there, and we had some beer, and then we each wrote down the name of 3 cities on a beer coaster. On the count of 3, we flipped the beer coaster. Yeah. Toronto made both beer coasters, even though I'd never been to Toronto before. I just heard good things. Fantastic. And so 2001, we moved up to Toronto, and I've been here ever since. So I would call myself a Torontonian now.
Wow, fantastic. Well,
I still don't like the winter. It's minus 1,000 degrees out there as we speak, and I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah, it's a bit chilly. I mean, when I first was coming to Toronto, I'm from Ottawa originally, which is, of course, an even colder place. It was like coming to Miami in February. Like it was fantastic. So
sunglasses, shorts, Hawaiian shirt, the whole thing.
Are you kidding me? It was fantastic. Well, listen, we kind of jumped in. I want to get a bit of, you're an interesting cat. I mean, as you said, you went to England on a Rhodes Scholarship. You're a best-selling author. You're a personal coach. How did you become who you are?
Gosh. I don't know if you ever heard the saying, inspiration is when your past suddenly makes sense. It's fair to say there's been very little planning and quite a lot of stumbling into good luck. A key moment was actually when I was 14, and a teacher in my high school in Australia said, "So, Michael, what are you doing after high school?" And I'm like,
I'm 14. I don't know.
I have no clue. But my dad is English and actually went to Oxford University. He grew up in Oxford. So I said, well, maybe I'll go to Oxford University. And my teacher said, laughed. Well, you'll have to be a Rhodes Scholar to do that. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know what that means, but noted. Yeah. And it planted a seed that actually got me over the line to win a Rhodes Scholarship.
Fantastic.
When I finally finished university, and I was in university for 8 years. I did a degree in literature. I did a law degree. I did a master's degree in literature. Still had no idea what I wanted to be or do when I grew up, but found myself in the world of innovation, like literally inventing products and services for other companies. And it was a pretty great first job because they were like, we like the fact that you're slightly weird. we like the fact that you're different. We're trying to be innovative and creative. So we're not going to beat you down and kind of force you to behave and, do a proper job. And so that was a very helpful start. And amongst other things, it got me deeper into the art of curiosity, because part of what we would do is we would run focus groups, ask people, how they felt about soup or credit cards or about a shopping brand. And it's where I really learned to go deep and be curious and ask good questions. And, fast forward a whole bunch of ways. I moved to Toronto. My flight out of Boston was on 9/11.
Come on.
So the job I had lined up in Toronto fell apart. And out of necessity, I kind of started my own business. with no business plan. I'm like, I don't know. I've got a wide range of apparently useless skills. I'll do, my business plan was, can I find somebody with a pulse and a wallet?
Sure.
Can I convince them to give me some of their wallet? But in the end, I found that intersection between something that I thought was important, which was around how do you bring out the best in the people with whom you work, something that I thought was done badly, which was how coaching was taught and trained in organizations, and something I thought there was a business model to, which is, again, selling coach training. So I founded a company called Box of Crayons, which in the end became about how do we teach practical coaching skills to busy managers and leaders. And then that got accelerated in like about 8 years ago when I wrote a book called The Coaching Habit. And having gone through a whole process of getting turned down 6 or 7 times by a publisher, I self-published it. And to my great delight and a certain sense of smugness, it's gone on to sell more than 1 million copies and has become kind of the definitive book for people and organizations to try and be more coach-like, stay curious longer with the people with whom they work.
And you would describe that on the business side, other than being offer, that would be your primary, that's what the business is about, helping people be lead better professional and personal lives. Is that how kind of the through line, what you describe your business as?
Well, I've got a couple of businesses. So Box of Crayons is the business to business, B2B. And that's about how do we give great managers and leaders and individual contributors the skills and the courage and the capacity and the desire to be curious, ask good questions, and kind of add coaching to the way that they manage and lead people. The company I have called MBS.works is about helping people find the work that matters to them, find their next big thing, and giving people the courage to kind of do the work that not only makes a bit of a difference in the world, but also is thrilling for them and also is a learning growth for them. So they kind of unlock their greatness while they tackle some of the hard things.
Oh, interesting. All right. Well, what brought us together today on the mic is your book that's most recently released book, How to Work with Almost Anyone. Who did you write the book?
Title, isn't it? It's like of all the titles, I've written 8 or 9 books. And of all the titles I come up with, this is the one that I'm like, man, I nailed that title. That's the best. Because everybody lingers on the almost just as you did. Everybody has a smile on their face when they hear the title. So it was a moment of success. I'm
not sure it'd be, if it was called How to Work with Anyone, I'd be, come on, that's bullshit. You can't work with anyone.
I'm like, I don't know. I mean, there would be a bold-faced lie. Like,
right.
You can't work with everybody. And I certainly don't know the secret to working with anybody, but almost anybody that I can take a crack at.
Very good. Now, who did you write the book for, and what white space, so to speak? You're an author. You've written a lot of books. There's both there's got to be a place, something unique about the book. But who did you have in mind when you sat down and put, fingers to keys or whatever, how you write, and talk about that white space for me? Yeah,
I'm writing it for people who are in organizations and interact with human beings in the work that they do. So a pretty broad audience. The truth is work happens through people for almost all of us, unless you're a monk, writing illuminated manuscripts somewhere in an isolated room. For almost everybody else, we get our stuff done through people. And the quality of our work relationships, when they're good and when they're bad, has such a big impact, not just on our success, does the work get done or not, but also on our happiness.
Right.
And,
not just the outcome of the work, not just the transactional nature of it, but, the world that is around you as you're doing your life's work.
Because everybody listening has had a moment where they're like, you know what? I was doing this project. The work was actually pretty good, but I had a terrible boss or I had a terrible collaborator and it poisoned the water. And at the same time, we've had an experience where we're like, I did this project. The work wasn't that exciting, but man, I had some really good people to work with, and it was a fun thing. It was an illuminating experience. But, most of us leave the quality of our work relationships down to chance. We cross our fingers, we hope for the best, and we see how it goes. And I know that people can be more active in making almost all of their working relationships a little bit better. And I wanted to give people a practical guide on how to do just that.
What's a keystone conversation? You refer to it several times in the book. So tell us, tell the listeners more about that.
Well, you start off by understanding that with all the key working relationships you have, happiness and success, people who influence that, you want to build the best possible relationship with those people. Not the best relationship, not every working relationship is going to be unicorns dancing through the fields, burping up rainbows. But you're going, look, I want this to be the best it can be between you and me.
Yeah,
and a BPR, best possible relationship, has 3 pillars. It needs to be safe, it needs to be vital, and it needs to be repairable. So, you want it to feel like you can be yourself. That's the safe thing. You want it to feel that you can push and provoke and step into the kind of the trickier areas. That's the vital. And you want to be able to repair it, because every working relationship gets kind of dinged or dented or cracked.
Strained or whatever.
Yeah, it inevitably happens. And the research will tell you that the relationships that continue to thrive are the ones where somebody's known how to repair that relationship. And in terms of the best way to get to a best possible relationship, the keystone conversation is a conversation about how we work together before you get into the work. And it sounds obvious, but it is a rare thing, because mostly the work always sounds really important. You're like, okay, it's urgent, It's important,
it's the mission.
Exciting,
that's the mission,
it's a crisis, it's the mission. That's what we're all getting paid for. We're getting paid to do the work, so let's crack on with it. And the truth is, work happens through people. So if you have a moment to say, hey, how can we best work together so that we bring out the best in each other, so that we avoid the worst in each other, so we give each other the best chance of success? That's going to not only make you feel happier about working with other people, but it's actually going to allow you to do a better job on the work itself.
I love the structure of the book. You've got your word and phrase toolkit. You've got a code, a QR code where you show how to model a keystone conversation. Talk about your. Yeah. Oh, by the way, you actually, in one of these, my favorite one, it's page 103 for those who are listening and buy the book. It's one of my favorite word and phrase toolkit solutions that you have. And I always hate asking people, or in a conversation, I'm going to play devil's advocate. I just hate that, So I love that's a hard question, but I think it's helpful for us to answer it. That's a great, different phrase to ask the same question. So thank you for that. I mean, that's a great example. Now talk about the tradecraft of how you structure a book. It's your 9th book. I don't know if the 9th is any easier some ways than the first, but the process you might have down a little bit. But talk about your tradecraft when you sit down and write a book. Does it just flow out of you? Do you have a structure and objective? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. Well, it starts with a couple of design principles. And the first design principle is I'm trying to write the shortest book I can that's still useful.
Okay.
My experience of most books is there's too many words. And there's not enough editing, and there's too much kind of filler. And because I publish my books through a kind of hybrid publishing thing where I'm not working with a traditional publisher, but I have some control over the look and the feel and the size of it, I'm like, success for me is somebody getting to the end of one of my books, and every page I add makes it harder for that person to get to the end of the book. Mm-hmm. So I'm constantly trying to go, what's essential? What is fluff that I can cut, and what is lean that I definitely want to keep in? So that's a starting point. Secondly, I'm trying to make this book practical and useful. So it's not just talking about the ideas, but I want to give people tools to shift their behavior. And that's why there are things like the QR codes inviting people to get extra tools and watch me do a keystone conversation and the like, because I know that a book is often the start of a change in behavior, but it's rarely enough for the whole thing. So I want people to know that the book is a portal to an ecosystem of support and encouragement and training and all of that good stuff.
It's like a launching point, right? I mean,
it's a launching point. Yeah. It's like, if I can get you, if this sounds interesting, there's more to help you go further. And then, Michael, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out the structure of the book, trying to see the shape of it, the arc of it. And that's kind of connected to this idea of, what's the shortest book I can write that's still useful? My bias is to write more rather than less. And so I'm
eight years of university will do that to
exactly,
you, I think, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I spend a lot of time with actually pen and paper drawing the shape of the book. I'll do a little square, and then I'll give a kind of headline, another square, another headline, and I'll kind of go, does it make sense if I'm reading it at that kind of high level? And I probably spend 3 or 4 months just playing around with structure and shape and trying to find the arc, and I'll do some writing, and then I'll try and figure that out. And then what happens is you write a first draft, and all first drafts are crap, and that still happens after your 9th book. It's like it's still a bad first draft, and I've now written enough books that I'm like at least comfortable with going, yeah, it's another disappointing start.
But there's a positive outcome, so I guess you kind of take your own advice, I suppose.
You have to write through the bad drafts to get to the good stuff. So I'm like, okay, here's my rough start. And by the third draft, it's often something's beginning to emerge. Sometimes you have to start all over. Like the book prior to this is a book called How to Begin, which is about helping people find their worthy goals. And I wrote 90 pages of this book, and I thought it was pretty good. And I shared it with people, and they were like, this is terrible. This is the worst. I don't even know what this book is about. And I literally managed to save one good line from that first draft, the line, we unlock our greatness by working on the hard things. I was like, that actually is really good. But then I had to rebuild the book from that single line again. So, sometimes it goes smoothly, sometimes it goes roughly, but the art of writing, the art of writing is keep writing.
Yeah, that architecture you describe is really comes out in the book. It's a very useful book, not just is it an interesting read, but
thank you.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. Now you've probably done, I don't know, I'm not even going to throw a number how many interviews about this book and your work. Is
more
there
than one? Yeah,
more than one, less than a million. Is there any question you would wish people interviewing you would have asked about the book of your work that you've never been asked?
The thing that gets asked less than I thought it would is about the final section of the book, which is about maintenance. So the book's roughly in 3 sections. The first section is, how do you prepare for a keystone conversation? I mean, it's kind of setting up the idea of a best possible relationship in a keystone conversation. But the work, part 1 is answering the 5 questions that I suggest as part of the keystone conversation. Because, Michael, secretly, this is a bit of a self-help book wrapped in a business book. The idea being, you need to know your own good answers to the 5 questions of the keystone conversation. What's your best? What are your practices and preferences? The good date and the bad date question, the repair question, how will we fix it when things go wrong? The more articulate you can be about that, the more helpful it is. The second phase of the work is to actually have the keystone conversation, and you pointed out that there's kind of all these kind of worksheets and toolkits around here's how you literally send the invitation, have the conversation, kind of manage that process. But once you've had a keystone conversation, the work's not done. The relationship carries on. I mean, it would be great if it was one and done, but that's just not reality. So once you do that, you're like, how do I keep this relationship safe and vital and repairable? And you do it with 3 ways. One is kind of checking in all the time. How are we doing? What's going on? How are you feeling? Here's how I'm feeling. Secondly, you repair often. There's always these kind of micro tears that are happening in the relationship where somebody's a bit disappointed, a bit let down, a bit confused, a bit, disgruntled. And the more you can keep checking back in that and going, do we need to say anything, do anything, just to kind of reorient to each other? And then the third part of it is to reset as required. Occasionally, a hard truth needs to be said, a reboot needs to happen, or a relationship needs to finish and wrap up because it's like, this is no longer tenable. And that final piece around the work of the maintenance of the relationship is the thing that gets asked least.
Okay, that last part. I'm still trying to figure out, shifting gears a little bit, I'm still trying to figure out the implications on work and society and all these things of the COVID era, this weird time we went through.
Yeah. You and me and everybody.
Well, as I read your book and reflected on it, I mean, the way we work and communicate, I mean, I've got partners that I rarely see And I talk to retailers who hire very senior people that they rarely see, and they never imagined themselves doing such a thing. Like they just didn't even fathom of it pre-COVID. The technology was kind of always in place, but culturally they never thought about it. How are you thinking about that in these large and small ways, or small and large ways? And are we in a transitional period of trying to figure this out, or is it it hasn't been that long, right? Since we've had this big lockdown. How are you thinking about the COVID era and its impact on the way we work and live?
I think COVID and beyond create a number of forces that make being in healthy relationship with other people harder. Because COVID disrupted that experience of let's hang out with each other. And that's not the whole of the thing, but there's no doubt that just when you're bumping into each other, when you've got those kind of day-to-day small interactions, there's a way that exposure allows you to kind of build a relationship. At the same time, we've all know that experience of being lonely in a crowd, where you're like, hey, I'm saying hi to people, but nobody really knows me.
Right.
And there's a way that through the various technologies we have, you can do just as good a job building a relationship through a camera, but it requires a little more effort. But it's not just COVID. You look at social media and, it's really clear that there's a way that you vanish into the infinity pool of social media and
sometimes it's
and you mistake, liking somebody's Instagram post as an act of friendship. And I'm like, it's not really that. Yeah. I read just today that, in companies that have people coming back, there this kind of office furniture where are these little pods that people can work in, kind of little solo pods designed to create a space to work in an open space office. And people are fighting over them. People are like, I just want to be in my little pod. I want to be isolated. So there's a trend towards structurally around all these ways that it becomes easier to isolate yourself. And there's an increase in loneliness and lack of connection. And I think, COVID is fuel on a fire that was already burning.
You mentioned, kind of last question, you mentioned other things going on. You touched on a couple of them. It's a noisy, messy, dangerous time. 2 wars, social media, evil or joy, AI that's got us into a post-truth world. You would know that concept well. What's your advice to the listeners on how they can continue to focus on improving their lives and their workplace relationships in and around all this stuff, stay sane and keep it all together?
Well, I'm not sure I have the answer towards, total sanity. I'm looking for it myself, quite frankly. But if I could offer one thing, it might be this. Somebody said this to me the other day, and I thought it was profoundly true. Nobody likes to be the first person to say hello, and everybody loves to be greeted. So there's this powerful insight as to be the person who reaches out, whether that's literally just being the person who says hello, being the person who says, hey, let's have a conversation about how we're working together to see if we can do a better job at working together. Being the person who goes, why don't I be the person that initiates or reinitiates or reignites this friendship that's gone quiet? I think that act of being the person who reaches out is a generous act.
Well, it's that's advice filled with great wisdom. So thank you for that. The book is How to Work with Almost Anyone. Michael, where do folks go to get in touch with you or learn more about the book and learn more about your work?
Thank you. Look, if the book sounds interesting, bestpossiblerelationship.com shows you where to buy the book, which is, everywhere, but it's also, there are free downloads. There's actually a video of me doing a Keystone conversation. So if you want to sort of see what it looks like in real life, there it is. And if you want just more of me in general and about the other books and kind of social handles, the website is MBS.works.
Well, Michael, I thank you very much for spending time on the Voice Retail podcast. I wish you much sanity, particularly as you're headed to Pearson Airport.
That's right.
So I wish you that. I wish you that for the afternoon. But anyway, listen, safe travels. Congratulations on your success in the book. I recommend it to everybody, and I look forward to keeping in touch and reading your next work and continue to understand what you're talking about. Thank you. So thanks for being on the pod.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure to check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis, and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker, and Rethink Retail 2023 Global Top Retail Influencer. If you want more information, content, or to chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone!